The early morning mist clung low to the forest floor, weaving through the towering pines like a ghostly veil. Ranger, the German shepherd, halted abruptly, his body tense, tail stiff, ears sharply pricked forward. Deputy Carla Finch noticed immediately the change in her partner's demeanor. This wasn't the casual alertness of routine patrol. There was something buried in the silence of the woods that spoke to Ranger's instincts, an unseen danger or a hidden truth. Guided by the dog's unwavering focus, Carla pushed through the thick underbrush, the damp earth muffling her footsteps. Her breath formed small clouds in the cool air as she stepped closer to the ancient oak tree half swallowed by moss and decay. That's when she saw him, a frail figure slumped against the rough bark, wrists bound tight behind his back with coarse rope, skin pale and cracked from cold and neglect. His gray hair was matted, face sunken, lips dry and cracked as if he hadn't spoken in days. For a moment, Carla's heart sank. Was he alive? Breathing? She dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers trembling as she searched for a pulse. A faint, ragged rise and fall of his chest reassured her, he was barely holding on. The old man's eyes fluttered open, vacant and distant, as if lost in memories that refused to surface. The only mark of identity was a faded patch on his jacket sleeve, the unmistakable emblem of the 101st Airborne Division. Carla's mind raced. Who was this man? How had he come to be chained in the woods like a prisoner, abandoned and forgotten? The forest seemed to hold its breath around them, as if bearing witness to a secret too heavy to speak aloud. She pulled off her jacket, wrapping it gently around the shivering veteran's shoulders, and reached for her radio, calling for emergency support with a voice barely above a whisper. This was no ordinary rescue. It was the beginning of a journey, a call to uncover the story behind the man who had been left to fade away beneath the trees. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting long shadows on the forest floor, Carla vowed silently that she would not let this forgotten soldier slip quietly into the silence of the past. The road ahead would be difficult, tangled with pain and betrayal, but somehow, guided by the steady presence of Ranger and the strength hidden in the old man's eyes, she knew this was only the first step toward justice and redemption. The ambulance's siren pierced the quiet forest air as it raced toward County General Hospital, carrying the frail man who had been found bound and broken beneath the ancient oak. Inside, Nurse Katie prepared a sterile room, her mind already racing through the possibilities. When the doors slid open, she saw the man's gaunt face, the bruises slowly blooming across his temple and arms, the slow drip of the gore that barely seemed to keep him tethered to life. Yet there was something in his eyes, a shadow of a story waiting to be told. Katie moved with practiced hands, carefully removing the damp jacket that bore the faded 101st Airborne patch, revealing the fragile skin beneath. As she cleaned his wounds, she noticed a small tattoo on his wrist, faint, nearly erased by time, but still legible, Harris, Raymond J. The name struck her deeply, sparking a connection she couldn't yet explain. She relayed this to the attending physician, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of questions swirling inside her. The charge nurse was notified, the sheriff called, this was no ordinary patient, and the mystery behind him was growing heavier by the minute. In the sterile, humming hospital room, Sheriff Ray Hammond sat beside the man's bed. Raymond lay still, eyes closed, fragile as glass but clinging stubbornly to life. Ray spoke softly, knowing the man might not hear, but hoping his words would bridge the silence. Your name's Raymond Harris. You served 2 tours with the 101st Airborne, Master Sergeant, decorated with the Bronze Star. You're not alone now. The words hung in the air, a lifeline thrown across years of neglect and pain. No immediate response came, only shallow breaths and the occasional twitch of a finger. Ray pulled from his coat an old newspaper clipping, a photograph of a younger Raymond, proud and upright, standing tall in uniform at a 4th of July parade. Ray's voice was steady but heavy with emotion. This is your home, or it was once. Lakeview Road. We're going to find out what happened to you. Outside the hospital, Ranger the K9 paced restlessly, never straying far from the door. The dog's unwavering loyalty seemed to echo the unspoken bond forming between man and community. As the sun set and the night deepened, the small town around them began to stir, not just with gossip, but with a collective will to remember, to honor, and to heal. This was no longer just a rescue, it was the awakening of a forgotten hero's story, one that would demand truth, justice, and the return of a dignity long stolen. And Nurse Katie, Sheriff Ray, and Ranger stood at the threshold of a journey that would test their resolve and uncover the hidden scars beneath the surface of a broken man and a silent town. Sheriff Ray Hammond sat back in his worn leather chair, the weight of the fading daylight filtering through the dusty window casting long shadows across the cluttered office. The man they'd found, the broken soldier, was no longer just a patient, he had become a puzzle piece in a much larger, tangled picture. The name Raymond Harris echoed in Ray's mind as he sifted through faded photographs, old service records, and the brittle yellowed pages of local newspapers. Each document whispered fragments of a life once vibrant, now obscured by time and silence. The town of Lakeview was small, the kind of place where everyone's history was etched into the fabric of the streets and faces around it. Ray's next move was clear, he needed to walk the streets Raymond once called home, to talk to those who remembered the man before the years of absence had swallowed him whole. Grabbing his coat and keys, he stepped out into the chill of early evening, determination hardening his features. His first stop was the faded brick house at 47 Maple Street, a modest, weather-beaten home with peeling paint and a sagging porch swing. The neighbors remembered Raymond Harris, a respected veteran, a quiet man who kept mostly to himself after his return from war. Mrs. Ellsworth, an elderly widow who lived next door, greeted Ray with cautious kindness. Raymond was a good man, though troubled after the service, she confided, wringing her hands. I heard stories, some said he struggled with demons no one could see. The sheriff listened intently, piecing together the whispers, financial troubles, a bitter divorce, and a sudden disappearance that had left neighbors puzzled and concerned. No one seemed to know where Raymond had gone or what had become of him after he vanished from the community years ago. Yet scattered among the shadows of his past were signs of a deeper pain, secret meetings, strange visitors, and a locked room in the house that no one was allowed to enter. Determined to uncover the truth, Ray returned to the sheriff's office and began digging through town archives, marriage records, and property deeds. The trail led him to a local veteran support group where Raymond had once been active, and to an estranged daughter named Emily, now living several towns away. Through quiet phone calls and careful inquiries, Ray learned of the man's struggle with PTSD, the fractured relationship with his family, and the haunting guilt he carried from a mission gone wrong overseas. The pieces slowly began to form a portrait not just of a soldier lost, but of a man betrayed by his own past, and perhaps by those he once trusted most. As night deepened outside, Ray felt the pull of the journey ahead, knowing that unlocking the secrets of Raymond Harris's disappearance meant confronting painful truths that many had tried to bury. This investigation was no longer simply about finding a man's past, it was about reclaiming his story, restoring his honor, and guiding a fractured soul back from the brink. And with each step forward, Ray felt the invisible threads weaving together, a call to justice, redemption, and the hard-won hope of healing. Sheriff Ray Hammond sat at his desk under the harsh glare of a single desk lamp, the rest of the office swallowed by the deepening night. Before him lay a small, battered duffel bag, the only possession found with Raymond Harris beneath the ancient oak tree. The bag was locked tight, worn leather stretched thin from years of use, its contents a mystery that promised to reveal more than just clothes or toiletries. This was the gateway to understanding the man's story, a relic holding secrets that had been buried alongside his dignity. With deliberate care, Ray unfastened the aged zipper, the metal grinding softly like a whispered confession. Inside, layers of folded clothing, a faded photograph, and a small, weathered notebook lay neatly packed. The clothes smelled faintly of earth and rain, as if they had traveled through storms and seasons in silence. But it was the photograph that caught Ray's breath, a black and white image of a young Raymond standing beside a woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile. A daughter's hand rested on his shoulder, small and trusting, hinting at a life long interrupted. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the notebook, its cover cracked and pages yellowed. Opening it revealed pages filled with neat, precise handwriting, a man's steady attempt to capture memories, fears, and fragments of truth. The first entries spoke of battlefields and lost comrades, a narrative punctuated by sorrow and regret. But as Ray flipped further, the tone shifted, the entries grew darker, haunted by shadows not of war but of betrayal and deception closer to home. One passage caught his eye, a cryptic reference to the Pact, a name that carried an ominous weight. Raymond wrote of a promise broken, of friends who turned to foes, and a secret so dangerous it could unravel lives. There were names, initials scribbled hurriedly, and dates that seemed to mark moments of quiet desperation. Ray's pulse quickened. This notebook was more than a diary, it was a map through a labyrinth of lies and wounds, a compass pointing toward the heart of a mystery. Among the pages, a folded letter slipped out, brittle and stained with age. The handwriting was different, delicate, feminine, yet firm. It spoke of forgiveness, hope, and a plea for truth. The letter hinted at a concealed past, at sacrifices made in silence, and at a reckoning yet to come. Ray's mind raced as he pieced together the connection, the woman in the photograph, the daughter, the broken soldier's lonely vigil in the forest, it all formed a thread that tugged at his sense of justice. The duffel bag also held a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside, Ray found a tarnished military dog tag, engraved with Raymond's name and a series of numbers. But beneath the dog tag lay a tiny key, delicate and ornate, almost out of place. Ray felt the weight of its significance, the key to a locked door, a hidden room, a guarded truth. This was no ordinary relic, it was an invitation to confront what had been buried, to unlock the silence Raymond carried with him like a shadow. As dawn began to break outside, casting pale light over the cluttered desk, Sheriff Ray Hammond felt the gravity of what lay ahead. The evidence in that duffel bag was more than proof, it was a call to action, a summons to navigate the treacherous path of truth and redemption. With the notebook in one hand and the key in the other, Ray prepared to step deeper into the story, into the unknown corridors of pain and courage that defined Raymond Harris's journey home. The evening air hung heavy with tension as Sheriff Ray Hammond stepped through the creaking door of the dilapidated farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, the dim glow of a single bulb cast long, flickering shadows over the peeling wallpaper and cluttered floorboards. Waiting in the kitchen was Jacob Miller, the man everyone knew as Raymond Harris's nephew, but whom Ray now suspected held far darker secrets than blood relations implied. Jacob's eyes, sharp and guarded, flickered with a mixture of defiance and something deeper, fear masked as bravado. Ray's boots thudded softly on the worn wooden floor as he closed the distance between them, notebook and key clutched tightly in his hand. "Jacob," he began, voice low but firm, "it's time to stop hiding behind family ties and lies. I have what your uncle left behind, his words, his proof. And I'm here to understand why he was left to suffer alone." Jacob's jaw tightened, fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't interrupt. Ray continued, unfolding the story piece by piece, the betrayal, the broken promises, the shadow of the pact that had poisoned their family from within. He revealed the contents of the notebook, the letter, the key, each artifact a silent witness to the pain Raymond had endured and the web of deceit that had ensnared him. "You knew what happened," Ray said steadily, "how Raymond was driven into exile by more than just his demons. You were part of the betrayal. Why? What were you trying to protect?" The question hung in the stale kitchen air like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Jacob's face twisted with anguish, the bravado slipping away to reveal the tortured man beneath. "You don't understand," he whispered, voice breaking. "It wasn't supposed to end like this. The pact was meant to keep us safe, from enemies outside and inside. But things spiraled out of control. Uncle Raymond, he found out too much. He wanted to expose it, and they silenced him. I tried to stop it, I swear." "You didn't stop it," Ray interrupted, "you let him rot in silence. You let a man who served his country, who loved his family, be abandoned to a fate worse than death. Justice isn't about family loyalty, it's about truth." Jacob sank into a rickety chair, the fight drained from him. "I'm sorry," he breathed, eyes glassy with regret. I've lived with this guilt every day. But it's not too late. You have his words now, his truth. You can make it right. Ray nodded, resolve hardening like steel in his chest. I will. For Raymond, for the family you betrayed, and for the justice long denied. This ends now. Outside, the first light of dawn seeped through cracked windows, illuminating the broken pieces of a family torn apart by secrets, now beginning to heal in the harsh light of truth. The journey was far from over, but at this moment, justice had found its voice, and it was louder than any silence that had come before. The town had long been a place suspended in shadow, where whispers of loss and betrayal clung to the cracked sidewalks like stubborn ivy. But with Raymond Harris's story finally unearthed, the heavy fog of silence began to lift, revealing a community ready to heal and reclaim its soul. Sheriff Ray Hammond stood at the edge of the town square, watching as neighbors, once distant and wary, gathered with cautious hope. The old oak tree, beneath which Raymond had been found, now stood as a symbol not of despair but of resilience, its roots entwined with the town's history and future. Word of Raymond's ordeal and the buried truths spread like wildfire, igniting conversations in every corner, from the dusty cafe counters to the bustling market stalls. The people, once fractured by fear and secrets, found themselves united by a shared resolve to confront the shadows that had haunted them for too long. Murals blossomed on faded walls, depicting scenes of renewal, hands reaching out, seeds sprouting, and the silhouette of a man standing tall beneath an ancient tree. It was a visual chorus of rebirth, echoing the spirit that Raymond's return had kindled. Inside the modest community hall, plans for restoration took shape. Old buildings, neglected and crumbling, were slated for repair, their revival mirroring the healing of the town's fractured identity. Local artisans and volunteers banded together, their efforts fueled by a newfound purpose. Stories were shared openly now, weaving a tapestry of collective memory that embraced both pain and hope. Children's laughter returned to the streets, a sound once stifled by years of silence and sorrow. Raymond himself, once a ghost among the living, began to reclaim his place within the community. Though his body bore the scars of abandonment, his spirit burned brighter than ever. Supported by Ray and those who believed in justice, he spoke at gatherings, his voice steady as he recounted not only his suffering but his unwavering love for the town he had once called home. His words stirred something deep within the hearts of those who listened, a call to action, to forgiveness, and to the courage needed for true renewal. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Raymond stood once more beneath the great oak. The very place of his despair had transformed into a sanctuary of hope, adorned with ribbons and tokens left by grateful hands. Children played at its roots, elders sat nearby sharing stories, and the community came alive with a spirit of unity that defied the darkness of the past. In this moment, Raymond felt the final pieces of his journey come full circle. From the depths of silence and solitude, he had emerged, not just as a survivor, but as a catalyst for change. His return had awakened the town, urging it to rise from its wounds and step boldly into a future shaped by truth and resilience. The hero's journey was never just about one man's battle, it was about the rebirth of an entire community, bound together by the enduring power of hope. The day of the ceremony arrived with a quiet dignity that seemed to settle over the town like a gentle dawn breaking after a long, dark night. There were no grand fanfares or extravagant speeches, no floodlights illuminating a stage, only the soft rustling of leaves under the old oak tree behind the courthouse, the very ground where Raymond had been found, bound and forgotten. It was here, in the heart of the town, that the community gathered, not to celebrate with noise, but to honor with solemn respect and shared remembrance. Raymond sat in the front row, his presence a testament to the journey he had endured. The crisp, clean shirt he wore was a quiet rebellion against the raggedness of his past weeks, and the fresh shave on his weathered face reflected a renewal that came not just from healing wounds but from reclaiming dignity. His boots, once scuffed and worn from hardship, now rested firmly on the ground, a symbol of the steady strength beneath his fragile exterior. At his side, Ranger, the loyal K-9 who had never left his side, sat quietly, his vest pressed and badge gleaming softly in the muted afternoon light. Sheriff Ray Hammond stepped forward, his voice low but carrying the weight of years, sacrifice, and justice. He spoke not just of Raymond's ordeal, but of the countless others who serve without recognition, whose sacrifices fade into the background noise of everyday life. There are some men, he said, who never ask to be remembered. They don't raise their hands or chase headlines. They simply do their duty. His eyes met Raymond's, and the room seemed to hold its breath, united in a silent promise never to forget again. The sheriff presented a simple wooden plaque, its grain worn but polished, engraved with the words, Raymond J. Harris, 101st Airborne Division, not forgotten, just quiet. The crowd rose as one, not in applause, but in a standing tribute of respect. One by one, neighbors approached, some shook his hand firmly, others nodded with tears glistening silently in their eyes, while a few placed small tokens beside his chair, a service patch, a photograph, a folded flag carefully wrapped like a sacred relic. Then came the moment for Ranger. Deputy Carla Finch knelt beside the faithful dog, pulling from her coat a small, gleaming box. Inside lay a custom K-9 medallion, crafted to honor service beyond duty and loyalty that never wavered. Carla read aloud the words etched into the metal, and as the crowd bowed their heads in quiet reverence, Ranger lowered his head, resting it gently on Raymond's boot. The unspoken bond between man and dog, forged in hardship and survival, became the heart of the ceremony, proof that true heroism transcends words. The event needed no music, no headlines, no fanfare. It simply needed the people to see, to remember, and to honor what had been lost and what had been reclaimed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows that intertwined with the roots of the oak tree, the porch light at the Lakeview house flickered on. It wasn't just a beacon of homecoming, it was a symbol of a town's promise, to hold its heroes close, even when the world had once turned away. Raymond sat back in his old rocking chair later that evening, the familiar creak soothing in the quiet night. Ranger lay curled at his feet, no longer a symbol of the fight but of the peace hard won. A nurse named Katie stopped by with a paper bag, soup, bread, and a note that read, "You're not alone anymore." Raymond smiled faintly, scratching behind Ranger's ears, whispering to the dog who had found him when even he had forgotten where he was, "Guess that makes you the real hero." In that silence filled with gratitude and understanding, the town found a new heartbeat, steady, unyielding, and ready to carry forward the legacy of a man who had once been lost but was now forever remembered. As the days grew longer and the warmth of spring settled over the town, Raymond found himself standing at the edge of the old wooden pier, gazing out at the endless stretch of water that had once seemed so vast and unforgiving. The same water that had mirrored his darkest moments now reflected the soft glow of a new beginning. He felt the weight of the past months, of pain, loss, and silence, slowly lift from his shoulders, replaced by something fragile but undeniable, hope. The journey he had taken, marked by despair and discovery, had come full circle, but it was the promise of what lay ahead that filled him now. He thought back to the day he was found, bound beneath the ancient oak, a man forgotten by time yet clinging fiercely to life. How the community had rallied, not just to save him but to rebuild themselves alongside him. The faces of neighbors, once strangers, had become pillars of strength, their kindness threading through the cracks of his broken spirit. Every small act, a hot meal, a quiet word, a hand extended, had been a stitch in the fabric of healing, weaving him back into the heart of a world he had thought lost. Raymond's eyes shifted to Ranger, who sat alert beside him, the faithful companion whose unwavering loyalty had been a lifeline through the storm. In that silent companionship, Raymond found the courage to confront his scars, both seen and unseen. The scars that told stories not of defeat, but of survival and resilience. Together, they had weathered the darkness and now stood ready to face whatever the future might bring. The town, too, was changing. The once fractured community had found strength in shared stories and collective healing. Old grievances softened, and bridges were rebuilt, not just in stone or timber but in trust and understanding. Raymond had become more than a symbol of endurance, he was a beacon of the quiet heroism that lives in everyday acts of courage. His presence reminded everyone that even when the world seems to abandon you, there is a way back, through connection, compassion, and the unyielding human spirit. On a warm evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the town gathered once more by the oak tree, not for ceremony or spectacle, but for a simple moment of shared gratitude. Children laughed, elders nodded knowingly, and the air was thick with unspoken promises. Raymond, standing among them, felt the fullness of belonging, a gift earned through trials and tempered by grace. In the quiet that followed, he spoke softly, his voice steady but humble. "I was lost," he said, "but you found me. Not just in body, but in spirit. This journey wasn't mine alone, it was ours." The crowd listened, the truth of his words settling deep into their hearts. As night embraced the town, Raymond walked slowly back toward the lights of home, Ranger padding faithfully by his side. The road ahead was still unknown, but the fear that once shadowed his steps had given way to a quiet resolve. He carried with him not just memories of hardship, but the strength of a community reborn and a soul restored. The hero's journey had ended, not with a triumphant roar, but with a gentle whisper of belonging, healing, and the enduring power of human connection. And in that whisper, Raymond found peace.